Pastor John will joke about my tenure as a youth director. And I spent about 5 years working with youth at my home church. And I'll never forget what I call one of my worst mistakes in ministry, which was in a few months into the gathering of the youth group. There was a big group of kids that would come every Sunday to the church. We would play volleyball and basketball and all sorts of games, and there tended to be a little bit of a cliquish vibe that sometimes happened. And one day I noticed one of the girls was over by the doors, and I went over to see her, and she said, "I don't think I'm going to come back anymore." And I said, "Why? We have such a good time. Why wouldn't you want to be here?" And she said, "You don't even know my name, do you?" And it broke my heart because I realized she was right. We had about 50 kids that would come in and out, and there were so many kids, and I knew this group and this group, but I didn't know all the kids. And I didn't know her name. I still don't know that girl's name. I could tell you about the freckles on her nose. I can picture her in my mind. I can tell you how she was sitting against the table by the doors that day. I can tell you everything about her countenance, but I don't know her name. And it's terrible. I don't know a lot of people's names. And I can have lots of excuses about that, but there's something to having people know your name, to be known. But in Scripture, we find hundreds of people that are noted in these verses and have been told of for thousands of years, whose names we don't know. They're unnamed characters in the Bible. And so even though that girl, I don't know her name, even to this day, she's still important to my story as a pastor and as a Christian. Just like all of these people who aren't named in the Scriptures are still people we have to pay attention to and notice as we're going through the Bible. We find one of those examples here in the Gospel of Luke. Because as Jesus is going through his teaching ministry, he gets to this point where this is immediately following the chapter where he has thrown the tables over in the church. As he's gone into the temple, he's cast out all of those who were selling and doing things that weren't what God wanted to be done in his house. And he said, "My house is to be a house of prayer." And as Jesus is there teaching all of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, people we don't necessarily know by name, we just know their role, they were all they were bothered, and they were trying to find ways to trap Jesus and find ways to even get him convicted so that he could be punished. And we get to this place in the Scripture where Jesus is looking up and he's taking notice of all the people who are giving into the church, into the temple treasury. And there is one woman that he notices in particular. When we tell this story about the poor widow and her small offering. What do we often call the story? The widow's mite, right? We talk about the gift that she gives more than we even talk about her. But Jesus notices this woman, and this isn't a parable. It's not a story he's making up. This is him looking at all the people coming into the temple, and he sees her. And she takes these 2 small copper coins that are worth about a penny, and she puts it into the offering plate. And he says, all of these others are giving out of what they have left over, out of their spare change. But I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than them all. All of them are giving out of their spare change, but she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had to live on. What do we know about this woman? Nothing. We know that widows in Scripture have no real status in the community because they had to leave their household and go live with their husband's family. And then if their husband passed away, then they had to marry the brother and try to produce an heir for that husband, and on down the line. If you had 7 brothers, you might have to marry all of them. That doesn't sound very fun. But then there were other widows who just spent their time giving glory to God. They gave their lives to the temple to worship. We have some of them in Scripture whose names we hear. People like Anna. She was one of those who gave all that she had in worship and honor of God. But in the Scriptures, we actually find 24 different references to the women who were widows. And they had no status in that community. They had to rely on others to take care of them. But here we see this woman giving of her heart, giving all that she had. We find this moment, this snapshot that seems so insignificant. It's such a small piece of Scripture that my study Bible that goes chapter and verse doesn't even mention this whole chapter of Scripture. And I said, why is that? Why isn't there more to be said about this woman, more to be said about this gift? And it could be because Jesus is so clear in what he tells us. It doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need us to dive further into it. But her gift is what is immortalized in these words of Scripture. We don't know her name, but we know what she did. Think about how important it is to be named. When we have a baptism, we bring a child or even an adult that comes forward, and we'll ask, by what name is this child known? And we find even in some traditions when people are confirmed into the church, they may even take on a new name. But here in the Bible, we have so many people who don't have names. We have Adam and Eve's sons. Who were they? Cain, Abel, Seth. There are more sons and daughters that we never hear about. There have to be more, right, to populate the whole world. Okay, what about Noah's wife? We just call her Mrs. Noah sometimes, right? But she let her husband build this ark, and she followed this plan that he had without a name. We have all the carpenters that worked on the ark. We have Gideon's 300 soldiers, 300 men with no names. Nameless prophets in the Scriptures. People who are only known by what they did. We have jailers and cripples and the Samaritan. We have the 70 disciples that Jesus sent out 2 by 2. And they came back rejoicing, but we don't know who any of them were. Just that they were nameless disciples. Half of the women in Scripture are unnamed. Half of them. But what's important for us to recognize is that their anonymity does not diminish their contribution. And maybe that's the reminder for all of us, that sometimes we try to make a great name for ourselves, but it's not necessarily our names that we're known by and that outlive us. What's that?
It's your deeds.
It's our deeds.
It's what you do, not who you are.
Exactly. It's how you live every day, what you've done for people. That is what goes on beyond us. And so I want us to just think about the impact of all these unnamed individuals that we have in Scripture. But then think about all of the unnamed people that have impacted your life. That you can go back And you can think about an act of kindness that they did that changed your life. And you may never know who they were, but something they did impacted you. When I was going for one of my medical tests at advanced radiology, I remember I was really frustrated on a particular day, and they had rescheduled this test, and my schedule had been changed because of it. And I'll never forget, I was finally taken back, and the woman said, "What's your birthday?" And I told her my birthday, and I just burst into tears. Because at that moment, all my frustration over the uncertainty of what was happening to me and the fact that I thought I was going to be missing Ernie's Thanksgiving play at school because I was at that stupid appointment, all of that frustration just got to me. And I'll never forget this woman, complete stranger, she just put her clipboard down and came over and embraced me. She just held me there for a minute while I cried on her shoulder. How strange is that? I don't know her name, but I will never forget that kindness, that she saw me as an individual in need. And she went beyond the protocol of her job that day and did something to show love in a very powerful way. As we go forward this week, I pray that all of us can see the unnamed people around us and give thanks to God for the contributions they share, but then also think about how we can be those unnamed figures that are remembered for our deeds, for the things that we have done in the name of a God who has given us so much of himself to bring us salvation and to bring us peace. May we learn from these people, this widow and her mite, and all of the gifts of those who are unnamed in these scriptures. Thanks be to God. Amen.